Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the QEM Heroes webinar series. My name is Christine Wood, and I serve as the Assistant Program Director for the Heroes Fellows Program at QEM. And for more than 30 years, QEM has been a national catalyst for STEM education transformation and research capacity building. Currently, the QEM network serves nearly 900 colleges and universities and reaches more than 8,000 individuals nationwide. This webinar is part of the HEROES initiative. The HEROES program brings together researchers with experience in the federal government to lend their expertise and support to the STEM research and education communities. Our fellows are here to provide tools and tips for navigating the funding landscape, developing STEM programs and partnerships, and improving talent retention in in-demand fields. We hope this series promotes engagement with our HEROES fellows and provides valuable resources to our participants. During the webinar, we invite you to use the Q&A tool to ask questions, and we'll address those at the end of the presentation. And the webinar recordings and slides will be available in the QEM Resource Hub. By attending this webinar, you will be added to the QEM network and granted access to the hub. And I'm so happy to introduce our presenters today. Dr. Chris Atchison is a former program director in the Division of Equity for Excellence in STEM within the Directorate for STEM Education at the U.S. National Science Foundation. Chris's research focuses on inclusive science education and designing and implementing accessible field learning and research experiences to support students with disabilities in geoscience academic programs. And Dr. Chaz Gipson is a national grants leader and scholar practitioner who has overseen large-scale discretionary grant programs serving hundreds of colleges and universities nationwide, advancing student access and success in STEM and high-need disciplines. His leadership spans federal grant monitoring, peer review oversight, technical assistance, and data-informed performance improvement. Dr. Gipson holds a PhD in communication, along with a master's in education leadership and policy studies from Howard University. He also earned a Master of Divinity in Counseling from Virginia Union University, a BA in Sociology and Public Health Sciences from Morehouse, and completed a postdoctoral fellowship at American University's School of Education. And Dr. Carrie Hall holds a PhDs in biology and STEM education and has over 15 years of experience in writing, directing, and mentoring grant efforts at the national level. Her passion is helping early career faculty divine and grow their research agendas and realize their talents as researchers, teachers, mentors, and lifelong learners, the full definition of a scholar. Her QAM territories are Oklahoma and Arkansas, and as a proud Tulsan, she's excited to be working in her home communities. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to our presenters today.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Christine, for that introduction. And our slides are coming up now. So thanks everybody for attending today. We're going to be talking today about the requirements that are often listed in solicitations and RFPs, but from our perspective as former federal granting personnel, oftentimes these requirements in the solicitations or the RFPs sometimes go unnoticed. And unfortunately, what that means is you might be missing an opportunity for the funding that you're hoping to gain. So we're going to talk a little bit about the components of RFPs. We'll focus somewhat on the National Science Foundation format, but we're going to talk in general about these solicitations and RFPs. All right, next slide, please. So to kick us off, could you have the next slide, Chris? There we go. Christine, would you put the poll up for us real quick for just a second? We want to ask one question of everybody in the audience. And how experienced are you with breaking down the requirements and the expectations of an RFP or a solicitation?
I'll give participants just a few more moments to respond.
Okay, good. So it looks like it's a good cross-section in the audience today, from being very experienced, having a little bit of experience, and then this is a new skill set. So that's great. Every time I go through a solicitation, especially if it's for a program or an agency with which I'm not as familiar, I always pick up new things. So based on the results of that poll, hopefully there's something in this presentation today that can speak to everybody in the audience. So just to kick this off, I want to give just a quick nod to a prior webinar that we had on March 10th about diversifying funding in STEM engagement and skilled technical workforce development. So if you want some specifics about finding funding in a diverse way, as far as what your portfolio of grant funding might consist of, you might want to revisit that webinar. And the link is there at the bottom, at this bottom bullet point on our slide. Just a reminder, as a member of the QEM network, you will have access to our resource hub, in which you will be able to pull up these webinars from past sessions. So when you're searching for funding, one of the best ways to start is a search through grants.gov. I'm not going to show those live for purposes of this webinar, but just a reminder, grants.gov, regardless of what agency you're searching for funding through, you can go to grants.gov and do keyword searches. You can also do by agency. This is a great way to start to find a funding source that might be applicable to your particular research. There are also many, many ways to search for private foundational funding. There are lots of websites out there that kind of serve as clearinghouses for private funding opportunities. Oftentimes, now you have to be, I'll throw a cautionary note. There are times when, Chris, the view just switched. There are times when you have to pay for some of these search engines, but so just caution, you can search them, but just make sure that there are ways to use these funding search sites for free. Okay, so for federal funding, for example, for the National Science Foundation, if you go to nsf.gov, right in the top banner, there is a box called Find Funding. When you can search by directorate, you can search by keyword search. And then same thing for Department of Education, for example, the grants and programs link in there, you can search for funding using those particular engagement mechanisms to find funding that might fit your particular research program. Okay, next slide, please. And that's for you, Chris.
Yeah, I'm struggling over here all of a sudden. Hold on, let me just start that over. I don't know why that changed like that, but
yeah, that was messing with me.
and it's still that way, so we're gonna go with it. So thanks for joining us, everybody. So things to consider after you've identified some funding sources that relate to what you're looking to do. Perhaps you find a solicitation or an RFP, request for proposals. The first things you want to do with that is to skim it. A lot of times just skimming the solicitation can tell you, yeah, this is aligned, or no, this is asking for different things. You really can't go off of the title of it most times. But just skim it first and then read secondly. So skim it just to see if it aligns to what you're doing, and then read more closely to get a little bit closer of a broad idea, and highlighting specific requirements. Identify the why. So what is it that the agency or organization is attempting to do with this RFP? And ensure that your proposed ideas will align to that specific problem or specific idea that they're trying to solve. And if it does, then continue on. Make notes as you read through it of specific language, because as you start to write a proposal, it's always best practice to use the same language that they have in the proposal, because understanding how the review process works, reviewers are going to be looking for very specific things, so use the same language that the proposal is written in. And then write down cues of organizational structure, like headings. It'll ask for very specific things, especially in the project description, that you need to include. So keep an eye on how on how the solicitation is organized, and you probably want to mimic some of that organization in your project description of your proposal itself. And then create a checklist as you're going through, and any questions that are being asked that you will need to respond to, and include and then consider all the supplemental documentation required that would be required of your proposal to ensure compliance. So what do most solicitations tell you? And understand this, that across the federal government, and then if you start looking at private foundations, they're all going to be organized very, very differently. There's going to be some that ask and require so many different things, but the points that we make here, again, like most everything that we've been doing, is going to be geared towards, especially for the three of us, going to be geared towards both the National Science Foundation and the Department of Education. And there will be other there will be similarities to other federal agencies. There'll be differences as well. So take a lot of these as guidelines, but understand that there might be additional. So solicitations will often tell you purposes and priorities that clarify what the funder aims to support. So specific research topics or specific project types. And that's always a really great place to start. And that's usually at the very beginning of the solicitation, when it's talking to you specifically about what they're trying to do and the types of projects that they're trying to fund. Eligibility criteria, who can apply? This is also incredibly important. If you are not affiliated with an academic institution, you'll want to make sure that you are included in the eligibility criteria. Submission deadlines. For NSF, you got to pay real close attention to these solicitation deadlines. And Carrie's going to talk about this in a minute, but a lot of times when a solicitation comes out, it'll list the date, but then subsequent years, it'll be based on like the second Tuesday of November every year or every other year. And so you gotta use your calendar on that. And that's just understanding that solicitations will last a while. And we don't put specific dates on because perhaps something might change. So putting it in that way just makes it easier on those who are writing the solicitations. Award information. This is also a good one. If you talk to a program officer, they can really never tell you how many awards are going to be funded because all proposals come in at different levels, at different budget amounts. So if there's a set $10 million for a program, they might be able to fund 20, they might be able to fund 50, who knows, based on how the budgets run. But the solicitations will document at this specific level, we anticipate being able to fund X number of projects. So you can keep an eye on that. And then the solicitation will also tell you about proposal requirements, special conditions, outlines required components like the technical budget and budget format that we just had a webinar on, letters of commitment versus letters of collaboration, page limitations, and the list goes on and on here. Specifically, though, some agencies have additional policies and procedures, and the PAPPG, the Policies and Procedures Guide, Proposal Awards and Policies and Procedures Guide. I never remember if I get that right, but the PAPG for NSF is another thing. So in addition to the solicitation, you want to make sure that you're also reviewing any additional priority policies that other agencies have. And these are like an umbrella, an overarching umbrella of all solicitations. All solicitations will fall under these overarching agency policies and guides. And we'll talk a little bit about that again.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Yeah, so that was a great overview of some of the things to look for. And so in the next couple slides, what I've done is taken some screenshots of the current solicitation from one of the programs that I ran at NSF. Now, one thing I do want to point out, this is the Education Core Research Program, or known as CORE. We call it the CORE program. Last year, across the federal agencies, a bunch of funding opportunities, of course, were archived and were no longer being funded. So NSF very helpfully puts this banner right at the top of a solicitation when you go to the website, it puts whether it is the active funding opportunity or whether it has been archived. And so I took these screenshots about a week ago. So at least as of a week ago, ECR Core is still available for funding opportunity. So you want to check right there, make sure it is a current one. Now, let's just say that the library of solicitations across the federal government, depending on how you find them, you can often stumble across one that has been archived and is no longer active. So just make sure you're going to that agency's website and search for the actual, make sure that you're on the active one, because the solicitations do change over the years. You want to make sure you're working off of the most current one. So this is the solicitation number, NSF 21-588. That's the core program, the current solicitation. It was published in 2021. That's always, that number is always indicative of the year it was published. So it's been running for a few years now. We were running the same solicitation on purpose because the agency was gathering a lot of data and doing a lot of programmatic assessment on the program and outcomes that are coming from it. So we've kept the same they have kept the same solicitation for several years. And it will often give the previous solicitation that it replaced, just to make sure that you're on the correct one. So the old one was published in 2019. The current one is 2021. It gives you the hosting directorate in the National Science Foundation. This one was through the Director for STEM Education, and it ran across the divisions for the directorate. So anyone proposing to this the core research program could, their focus area could be across graduate education or undergraduate education or learning in informal environments. Now, this is what Chris was talking about with the due date. I know this is tiny on this slide, but the proposal due date here, it says 5 p.m. on the submitter's local time. So whatever time zone you're in, it's due at 5 o'clock. It'll lock you out at 5:01 your local time. And then when it was published, it was due on October 12th of 2021. And then it gives the following year and then first Thursday in October annually thereafter. So you look at your calendar, what's the first Thursday in October? That's your due date at 5 p.m. your local time. It used to be midnight, but that caused some confusion. And it also put a lot of stress on the Office of Research person who was hitting the final submit button. They'd have to be at work at midnight that night. So because, people wait until the last minute. And so they put it at 5 p.m. local time. Okay, next slide, Chris. Thank you. Okay, so this is breaking down some of those revision notes. This is where the agency notifies you of changes that have been made since that publication date in 2021. So there are revision notes here. You want to make sure you're paying attention to those, because oftentimes this is where the program officers will draw your attention to areas of focus where they want to see work being done. It clarifies what they mean by fundamental research. They're funding awards in 3 different research areas: STEM learning and learning environments, broadening participation in STEM, and STEM workforce development. Those are the 3 core areas where they're taking solicitation or taking proposals right now. You need to list that research cluster. Research topic clusters is added. Pilot studies are new to a level 1, so there's different levels of funding which come later in the solicitation. They want 5 key words that are listed on your cover sheet, and then the justification for a project level and duration. You have to justify if you're asking for funding at level 1, 2, or 3, and if you're asking for 3 years, 4 years, or 5 years. So this is just language you need to make sure that you're putting into your proposal right up front so the program officer sees it right away. Okay. Here's the research areas again that they're accepting proposals to fulfill. The funding levels here, level 1 is at $500,000, and that includes, if you remember from the previous slide, that includes pilot studies. Level 2 proposals up to 1.5 million, and then level 3, 2.5 million. And you have to, again, they say you have to justify that level of funding and the duration of the project. And then this important note, this was put in here with a notice, like Chris said, the bold title or the section heading. It's in bold, it's in a bigger font. This is the program officer signaling to you about broadening participation in STEM. So this is something that you need to pay attention to. This is current, they're really drawing your attention to, and it's telling you that NSF is mandated to broaden participation in science and engineering. Since 1950, that has been one of the purposes of the agency. And Congress has charged NSF to develop intellectual capital, both people and ideas, with particular emphasis on groups and regions that traditionally have not participated fully in STEM. So they're saying, regardless of what's going on in the political discourse, broadening participation is a mandated thing at NSF. So pay attention to that. Okay, Chris? Okay, and then the solicitation often lists exactly what should be included in your 15-page project description. And it was surprising to me as a program officer how often people miss this. So if you go down into the solicitation, it says right here, elements of the proposals are strongly encouraged to address the following elements in the 15-page project description. That's basically a program officer's way of saying, hey, we need to see this exactly. And you can even use these as your section headings in your proposal as you're writing. So logical connections to establish research base, a comprehensive research plan to assess success. So what's your assessment plan? And et cetera. So it goes on. There's about 12 different categories in this solicitation of strongly encouraged to address these items. So yeah, if you pay attention to what's written in the solicitation, it outlines for you exactly what you need to write about. Okay, next slide. And most importantly, that's probably the most important thing I can tell you right now, is you have to pay attention what it's asking for. Regardless of what your research plan might be, if you outline it and talk about exactly the things that the solicitation is asking for, your proposal would be scored and reviewed much higher than if you had gone off in your own direction. So that's the most important take home I can give you, is what the solicitation asks for, that's what you should write about. Okay, I think it's over to you, Chris.
Yep, thanks, Carrie. So there's other opportunities as well. NSF specifically, I think several other agencies do Dear Colleague letters, are very similar to Dear Colleague letters as well. So you saw when Carrie was talking about the due dates for proposal submissions on that solicitation, it had several years worth of upcoming due dates. If things change rapidly, NSF will post a Dear Colleague letter to bring attention to specific areas of research in addition to what the solicitation already has. So, Dear Colleague letters themselves do not offer funding. Dear Colleague letters point to solicitations with additional research opportunities or opportunities for funding new research. So this Dear Colleague letter that offers updates to existing programs to encourage applicants of existing grants to focus on specific areas of interest to the agency. And so this could be something that has happened quickly, and they'll put out a quick couple of page Dear Colleague letter explaining it. And then we'll go through one of those right now. So this is a Dear Colleague letter. It is still active, and it was published on August 5th of 2021. So this one, specifically, persons with disabilities, STEM engagement and access. You can align this specific Dear Colleague letter, and I don't include an image of this, but on the Dear Colleague letter itself, it has a long list of all of the different funding programs that you can align this to. So you would submit a proposal to one of those programs and reference this Dear Colleague letter as you're doing it. So some things to keep in mind here, and then in the red text box. Again, this doesn't offer funding, but it points to programs that do offer funding, and it encourages people to consider new avenues of research. So this one encourages new proposals or supplemental funding to existing projects to support access and engagement in STEM learning, research, and workforce development for students, postdocs, and faculty and staff with disabilities. So this is a way of encouraging the inclusion of people of the actual research staff and students participating in research to keep them engaged in the research process. Further down on the Dear Colleague letter, you'll see at the very top here, most Dear Colleague letters, almost all of them require you to reach out to the relevant program and have a conversation with the program director before submitting a request for funding. Even if it's a brand new request for funding or if it's a supplemental request based on an existing funded award, you need to have a conversation with the program officer to discuss your plans and your ideas. Anything that comes through typically, probably it very well might not get reviewed if there's been no record of submission or of that discussion. A lot of times you'll be required, similar to other project types, but you'll be required to include a letter of approval for submission when you're submitting to some of these. A little bit further down, you'll notice that it also points to the NSF Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide, the PAPG, that I was just referring to a little bit ago. So the overarching policies guide for National Science Foundation, the PAPG, still comes into effect here. So you need to make sure that you go through not just the solicitation that you're wanting to align this DCL with, but also go through the PAPG. There's additional guidelines specific to Dear Colleague letters that you want to reference. And then down below here, you'll see that the Dear Colleague letter actually outlines specific areas that the program officers or that the National Science Foundation is wanting you to attempt to focus on. And this is such as, but not limited to. This doesn't mean, okay, I have to do this or I have to do this. If you have, this is why you need to reach out to your program officer, because if you have an idea that might not align to one of these 3 bullets specifically, that doesn't mean that your idea is not fundable. So you really want to have a conversation about what your ideas are, especially if they don't align to the ideas that are listed here in the Dear Colleague letter. And then continuing down a little bit, you'll see that an organization submitting a new proposal, again, this is after you've had the conversation with the program officer, there's requirements for how you even title this document. So when responding to this Dear Colleague letter, please include Disability Access DCL at the beginning of the proposal title or immediately following any solicitation-specific title prefix. So that means any solicitation-specific title prefix, it reverts back to what the primary solicitation is requiring you to do. And so if there's a specific title that solicitation requires you to do, that comes first. And then you would add Disability Access DCL to that. So again, there's, it's a hierarchy. You look at the solicitation, look at any overarching things with the PAPG, and then any additional requirements that this Dear Colleague letter would be requiring of you. And then interestingly enough, I wanted to point to this at the very bottom, because clearly information is not updated regularly. So if you're going to want more information on this, it's going to ask you to contact 2 people who are no longer at the National Science Foundation. This is just to say that if you try to reach out to someone and you don't get a response, there might be a reason for that. So don't give up. Try to contact other individuals and ask who you might reach out to if you're not getting a response. So any emails to these 2 individuals are not going to be returned because they're probably lazy and they don't. I'm kidding. All right. So last slide here, and then I'll pass it over to Chaz. Additional general proposal guidelines. Again, the PAPG, which was published. And so this, there's so many things that get layered here. And this is another example of what's getting layered. The most current PAPG was published in January of 24. And there has not been a new full document published since then. However, especially with all the things that are happening in the federal government right now, there's a lot of things moving. And so they're not going to put a lot of energy into completely publishing an entirely new document. This document is ginormous. So instead, they are publishing supplements to the PAPG. So there was one published on December 8th of 25, and then another one that was just published this past January 22nd that provides additional information, which might be specific to executive orders or anything changing within the federal government that needs to be drawn attention to. So when I say look at the solicitation, look at the PAPG, look at the DCL, you'll also want to see if there are any supplemental documents to the PAPG as well, or any supplemental documents to any of the policies and procedures with any of the other organizations or agencies. If you're not really sure, reach out to us. We can have a conversation with you on things that you want to consider, especially any of the additional procedure guides that you want to make sure that you're aware of, or contact the agency. If you're not sure, contact the agency and have that conversation with the program officer as well. All right. So again, this is going to go completely sideways here because I feel like I'm getting more and more complicated the more I talk about it. If you're unsure, please reach out to me and we can talk about this. You don't have to just submit to a solicitation. Yeah, I didn't order this very well because now I know I'm creating confusion here. I'm certain of it. Uh, there's also an opportunity for you. You can submit a proposal specifically or directly to the PAPG. There are ways to do that, and more specifically, if you want to submit a planning grant, a synthesis study, like a literature synthesis study, a conference grant, a rapid or eager or supplemental proposals, you can submit those directly to the PAPG. But what you do, very much like a Dear Colleague letter, you will still reference a home program that will align to that. So much like the Dear Colleague letter, you would reference a program or a solicitation that currently exists. You would do something very similar by submitting something to the PAPG. If you had a planning grant for a project idea and perhaps the solicitation that that you're really interested in doesn't have a project type, like what Carrie was talking about, they might not have a project type for a planning grant. You could probably still submit a planning grant related to it through the PAPG. But again, I'm going to say this again and again, contact your program officer before submitting to the PAPG. It's always best if you have an idea and you're really not sure how to proceed, contact someone and talk to them about it. Okay? All right. Chaz, I think it's over to you, sir.
All right, thanks, Chris. So yes, right here we're going to go into understanding why strong ideas don't get funded. So let's start with how we are approaching our grant writing. So most proposals do not fail because the idea is weak, but many proposals that actually don't get funded and fail because it's misaligned with what the funder is actually asking for. There's too often or too many times people approach the RFPs like a formality. They scan for deadlines, they check for eligibility, they glance at the funding amount, and then they jump straight into writing. And so, in for example, an institution may want to create a mentoring program for their students, which is a strong idea. But if the RFP is focused on improving STEM retention through data-driven interventions, and your proposal emphasizes general mentoring without a STEM or data focus, you're already lost the alignment right there. And it's not a bad idea. It just doesn't fully respond to the problem that the funder is trying to solve. So, and that's where many people go wrong. They treat the RFP like a formality instead of a strategy document. So I encourage, as you seek proposals and RFPs, don't just skim it. Don't just pull keywords out or a few keywords, then start writing what you want. But here's the shift. You got to understand that RFP is not just information. It's your scoring blueprint. It's not a guideline. It's literally, I tell people, this is your Bible in this space. It's every requirement, every priority, every line is there for a reason. And when we don't take time to really fully unpack it outside of the eligibility requirements, outside of the basic deadlines and those normal things that we just look for to see if we can get in, if we're able to write to this, we have to really unpack it. We end up writing a proposal that sounds really good, that sounds really compelling, that sounds full of passion. However, it doesn't score well. And at the end of the day, if it doesn't score well, it will not get funded. So please really take time to review that RFP, and I'll talk more about the scoring in that as well momentarily. Next slide, please. Next, you really want to, and some of this may sound repetitive to what I just said, maybe what Chris or Carrie stated, or even what you may have heard on past webinars. So, but this is very intentional to re-emphasize some of the same points for us. But it's important to also understand the architecture of an RFP. Every RFP is carefully constructed, and when you really understand the architecture, then everything changes for you. At the top, you'll always find the program purpose and legislative intent. This tells you why the funding exists and tells you what problem the agency is trying to solve. So, for example, a program might say, its purpose is to increase college access and persistence for low income and first generation students. That means everything in your proposal must connect back to access, must connect back to persistence and those populations. Next, you'll of course see the priorities, absolute priorities, competitive preference priorities, and some are absolute, which means the absolute means you must absolutely address everything or you're not eligible. And competitive meaning you earn extra points if you include certain things. Then you see the eligibility requirement and target population. It's pretty much who is this funding truly for? Who are we serving? Who are you serving if you're awarded this grant? Then you also see what's allowable, what type of activities are allowable and not allowable, which tells you what you can and cannot do. That simple with the funds. These are not unrestricted funds. These are very restricted funds. So you want to make sure you know what you can and cannot do. And if the RFP funds tutoring, advising, and student support services, but you propose that you're going to build a new facility or you're going to launch something outside of the scope, that costs may not be allowed and it will weaken your proposal. But also, let's be clear about the review criteria as well. This is where the proposals are scored. Okay. And this is where decisions are made. And yet, in this section right here, most people really underutilize it. So, for example, you might see something called need for the project, and it might be worth 20 points. A project design, it might be worth 30 points, or evaluation plan, it might be worth 20 points. That's just not information, that's strategy, because now you know where reviewers will spend their time, and you also know where to spend yours. So, strong applicants don't just read RFPs, they study how they are structured and how they will be evaluated. Next slide, please. So I'm going to give you a strategic framework for deconstructing a RFP. So when we approach any solicitation, one of the things I like to think about is a three-step process that can bring clarity and strategy to the entire proposal. One, as you see, identify priorities. Look for repeated language. If you see phrases like evidence-based, underserved populations, and measurable outcomes over and over again, those are actually signals. So, for example, if data-driven decision-making shows up 5 times in your RFP, your proposal should not just mention data once. It should be embedding it throughout the proposal. The second step you see is translating requirements into action. So don't just read the RFP, but you definitely want to make sure you break it down. So that if the RFP says applicants must describe how they will evaluate program effectiveness, you want to turn that into your checklist. Do we have an evaluation plan? Are we naming the methods? Are we including measurable outcomes? You're essentially building your proposal outline directly from the RFP. That's why I said it's your Bible. Okay. The third step is reverse engineer scoring. So let's say the project design is worth 30 points, but your need for the project is worth 10 points. Well, that tells you something very important. You don't want to spend equal time on both. While everything is important because everything has a score, but you want to make sure when you get to project design, which is worth 30 points, that section should be deeper, it should be more detailed, and it should be more developed. You want to spend more time where the points really, really live and develop depth where the weight really exists. But that doesn't mean don't put energy on something with less points. The need for the project is still strong because you need all your 10 points. Okay. But at the end of the day, you're not just writing, but you are positioning your proposal to earn points. And when you earn points, everything changes because you will likely have a greater opportunity to win. Next slide, please. Here we talk about, or we understand how our proposals are actually being scored. So every competitive grant is evaluated using a structured scoring process based on the review criteria outlined in your Bible, the RFP. You have this again, and I can't stress the importance of studying it, unpacking it thoroughly. Every proposal, it with an RFP, have assigned point values as well. So, and reviewers are trained to score based only on what is clearly written and demonstrated, not what you meant, not what you hoped for, not what you intended, not what you hope they would infer, but you have to be very clear on everything. If I have to look for it, it's wrong. If I have to search for it all over, it's wrong. So make sure everything is in alignment. And so this is critically. If it's not, and I'll say it in another way, if it's not explicitly stated, it may not earn points. Okay. And so here's where your strategy comes in. Not all sections, as we already stated, are equally weighted. So with that section that's 30 points and the other section that's 10, it tells you where you want to invest your time in detail. Strong applicants do everything to maximize the points. Um, Also, if your proposal implies something but doesn't clearly state it, that's the same thing. If your RFP is asking for a detailed evaluation plan with measurable outcomes, and you say something like, reviewers will evaluate the program and track success. That sounds good, but it's vague. Now, on the other hand, instead of saying something vague, you could say something like, we will measure student retention rates, GPA improvement, and program participation using quarterly data collection and annual reporting. Now, that's something that will earn points because it's very specific. It's measurable and it's clear. And people often ask if scoring, also people ask if scoring is the same across agencies. And the structure really varies based on the agency, but the principle is consistent. So at the Department of Education, scoring is typically very detailed and point-based, and you'll see categories like need, design, evaluation, management plan, etc. And each have assigned points. At the National Science Foundation, proposals are evaluated in most cases using intellectual merit, using broader impacts. But either way, whether it's NSF or Department of Ed, HHS, or wherever, every reviewer is still asking, is this proposal clear? Is this proposal rigorous? Is this proposal aligned with the RFP? So while formats may look different, every agency want to know if it's in alignment, if it's evidence-based, if they have clarity. Because ultimately, reviewers not coming to just fund your ideas, they're funding what they can justify through the scores. Next slide, please. Things that we certainly want avoid in terms of pitfalls through proposal development. So one of the most common mistakes that we see is people start writing too soon. As I mentioned earlier, you have to fully unpack that RFP to make sure that you understand. Um, but people just look at those basic things and to see if it's kind of in alignment with their area, and they start developing the narrative, and that often leads to misalignment. Another major area that we see is in the review criteria. If you're not writing directly to how the proposals are scored, you're leaving points on the table. So know that. And we often see, most reviewers see a lot of generic proposals, a lot of copying and pasting from previous submissions. So just because you've been funded before, uh, it's highly not advised to copy and paste just to put, no, because you have different reviewers and things change, priorities change. So again, instead of any copying and pasting from previous submissions, you want to make sure that you uh, give every proposal the detail that it merit, because like I said, every RFP is different, every funder is different, and every reviewer is different. Then also, again, as mentioned earlier, there's budget alignment where the numbers sometimes don't match the story. So for example, proposing expensive technology when your RFP prioritizes direct student services, that's a disconnect, and it raises red flags for reviewers. And finally, of course, there's compliance issues. So page limit is important. If they tell you it's 65 pages, please do not submit 100 pages. Don't submit 68 pages. It must be 65 pages. Formatting is important. If they have any required attachments, usually they ask for resumes, they ask for job descriptions or whatever is that's listed in your RFP, please make sure that's a part of it, because or that it will become a compliant issues. And these things may seem small, but these small things have the possibility to disqualify you or significantly lower your score. Okay, deadlines. If it's due on September 30th at 4 o'clock, please don't wait till the last minute to submit. We don't know what challenges will come up in the system. And what don't try to submit it at 4, because if it comes in at 4:01, it will likely be disqualified because it's system based and time based. Um, so details matter and strategy matters even more. Next slide, please. So as I've approached my close, I want to leave you with a mindset shift, a strategic shift from RFP to funded proposals that can really transform of how you approach funding opportunities. So again, I'm not saying you are, but if you are, stop writing proposals based on what you want to say, but start writing them based on what the funders needs to see. And they've laid it out in black and white. Treat the RFP as your blueprint. Let the RFP guide your structure, let the RFP guide your content, and let it be your emphasis. Every section of your proposal should clearly align with funders' priorities. Every paragraph should serve a purpose. And most importantly, write to the scoring criteria. Because the strongest proposals are not just compelling, but they're strategic, they're precise, and they're responsive. Okay. And when you learn how to truly unpack an RFP, you move from guessing to competing, and then from competing to winning. And that's where the shift really happened, the strategic shift. And every section must be clearly aligned, and you want to address everything directly. So if RFP emphasizes outcomes, don't just describe activities that you would do, but describe how it would change, how it would impact, who's being impacted by your work. And we should be able to see the quantitative data from the numbers and the drawdowns, but we should also see the qualitative and see that impact. So we want to see those outcomes. Instead of saying we'll offer tutoring services, say something like we'll increase student pass rates in math by 15% through targeted tutoring interventions. So that's the difference between activity and impact. And again, strongest proposals are strategic, structured, and responsive. Next slide, please. And my final takeaways as we conclude officially, the RFP is once again your blueprint, not a barrier. When you learn how to read it strategically and you stop guessing, you start writing with purpose. Remember, alignment is different. It's the difference between a proposal that's submitted and one that is often funded. So moving forward, don't just respond to opportunities, position yourself. Take these strategies that myself, Chris, and Carrie, and the other fellows through the other presentations have given you and position yourself to win. Thank you. Next slide. And this concludes our formal presentation. If you see the QR code, you can certainly keep up with our events page. You can see the Heroes webpage so you can learn about the other heroes and their expertise. And they do have office hours where they're able to assist you. And we would love to get your feedback and you evaluate this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much for such resourceful and informative presentation to all of you. We are open for questions now. We have about 9 minutes. You may use the Q&A box. You may raise your hand to come off mute, or you could put something in the chat.
Everybody's too stressed out about tax day. It's got to be.
We have a raised hand from Jessica Goodman. Jessica, I am going to allow you to come off mute.
I just want to say thank you for these series because as a instructor, these are a lot of the same strategies that I give students as they're writing proposals and courses, as they're doing assignments. But I think sometimes us as the researcher forget about some of the tips that we give our students. And so everything that you guys were saying today in terms of, reviewing the RFP first, make sure that you're contacting anyone that they're suggesting that you contact before you start to write, because a lot of times we have this idea first, and then we just want to, and we're writing to the idea and not to the RFP. So going back and slowing down that process so we can get these great ideas out to be funded, to be researched, and to provide to our community or to our students or whomever that our research projects are going to impact. I think it was, for me, on this day, it was very much needed because I'm thinking about those proposals that did not get funded. And I thought they were great ideas. And now I'm thinking about, as well as I feel like I followed instructions, did I write to what the RFP was asking? And did I maximize my attainment by being as measurable and as clear and explicit as possible? And so now there's one that I wasn't funded for, but they said that they would still look at it. Now I want to go back to it because I was going to leave it alone, but now I want to go back to it and look at it with fresh eyes with these tips in mind. So thank you.
That's a great point, Jessica. It just reminds me of my days in the classroom. And how many times do we say, did you read the syllabus? Did you read the syllabus?
Yes.
It's kind of the same thing. Did you read the RFP?
Yes, very much so.
And the importance of starting early, like Chaz was saying, is it takes a few months to have enough time to do the background work and to contact a program officer with any questions you might have. It takes time for that, and that I would roll right into Evangeline's question. Thanks for joining us, Evangeline. Good to see you online. If it doesn't show you review criteria, you're suggesting that we create a rubric from that. I would actually advise you not to make assumptions about the review criteria off of a solicitation if it's not obvious. there are certain things like Chaz was indicating. If you see something in the solicitation that is showing up time and time again, that's indicative of the importance, the value of having that in there. However, again, this is just another instance of reaching out and asking those questions and just being certain of what you are doing, sharing your ideas, asking for advice, asking for suggestions, and especially as it comes to the review process.
Yeah, April Erickson, we see you have your hand up and you are free to come off mute.
Thank you, Christine. Let me piggyback first on something Chris said and something that I've noticed with doing a number of proposals at NASA. Um, so the thing that he said about a rubric, we actually think it's really important when doing the NASA solicitations or proposals to use a rubric and we would use one when we're creating them because there were so many facets to that proposal that a rubric really helped us to keep a track of all the things that were required for the proposal. Um, but I think those, and just as you said, they were very obvious. And so we usually created it with what we called a blue team kickoff. I wondered if you guys could maybe highlight the fact of what preparation you could do prior to an RFP coming out, and the things that maybe you would familiarize yourself with. I think I heard some nuances of that discussion. Um, I'll just give you an example at NASA. We actually have a taxonomy that shows all of the sort of technologies and science areas that we want to address. And so a couple of months is really not enough for us to prepare. We actually need often a year to plan a mission proposal that would be submitted. And maybe you guys could share your experiences with some of the other agencies.
So if I'm understanding correctly, April, probably at least for the National Science Foundation, what I would say in that regard is exactly what Chris was going over is the proposal and award preparation guide, the PAPBG, is that outline basically of what the review process is. Not only how to prepare it, but also it goes over the review criteria for all of NSF, regardless of what program that you're writing to. And so that really is where I point people when they have general questions about developing a rubric or how do I know or what do I do? It's following that intellectual merit broader impacts criteria that is the gold standard of review for NSF. And I know other agencies do different things. So for example, Chaz was talking quite a bit about the scoring system at the Department of Ed. So every agency is a little bit different. So I think to your point, you have to dig in to the guidance from each agency depending on who you're writing to. And if I've misinterpreted your question, feel free to clarify.
No, I think that's exactly right. But I think the question was that someone asked, should they do a rubric? And I would almost certainly say yes, because it does help you to track all of the different nuances, and particularly because so many of the disciplines or the different agencies have sort of a different style to what they're requesting. It's a good way to track so that you're not missing something if you jump from one group to the other. I think the question I was asking more is when formulating the ideas. Um, we often formulate our ideas way, way before, and I was saying in this particular case, NASA or DoD, because we have insight as to what the agency needs are based on the things that they post or the requirements that they, or the strategies that they put out there. Sometimes they put out plans for the future. I can think of the decadal studies would be a good example for NASA that is put out by national academies. But then there's also taxonomies of requirements that they identify that kind of drill down to lower levels of expertise or science or technology that may be needed. And I wondered if that might be the case for NSF. I know they have the big, broad topics that they suggest because I often found that just a few months was not enough time to work on a proposal, and I really needed 6 months to a year sometimes to do a really big one.
Thank you, April. I'll just jump in real quick. One of the things as Carrie started off talking about grants.gov. So sometimes I encourage people to always look at grants.gov because it gives you the forecast most time of what's coming out. So at least you'll know what's coming down in the future and it'll say coming soon or whatever the case is. But the other things, a few other tips I would encourage is to study the funder before they start funding or put it out there for RFP. So review previously funded projects, like what's already out there. I will analyze past RFPs from other program priorities, identify trends in language and focus areas. So you're looking at something from NSF, you already know what proposals are out there and so how to demonstrate intellectual merit, etc. The other thing is, so as you are studying what's already out there, so like for example, if a grant program is out there and it's funded for 5 years and you know that program is like in year 3, year 4, there is a strong possibility that that program will likely be funded again. So especially if it's an ongoing program and that has longevity, so you can start building your proposal components early, just thinking about that in mind, already having a needs assessment, having clear data on your problem of what you're trying to do in alignment to that, building a defined program model or framework in an evaluation strategy, and what's your basic approach. So don't even wait to the RFP to come out for you to figure out what is it that you need. If you know or you have an idea that this program that you want to be a part of or that you want to go after will likely be funded again in 2 years or a year. You also want to maybe start aligning your team early, because one of the things that we talked about last a few weeks ago, you want to make sure that you have the capacity and know who on your team will have the capacity to do the work. So identify internal stakeholders, external stakeholders, faculty, etc. Confirm roles and responsibilities. You are already thinking about the future as it come and engage and also engage potential partners and let them know. And so you'll know by the time, because you know it's a short turnaround when your proposal is actually due from the time that you get it. And so you already know who's providing data, who's leading what part of the project, who's managing the budget, who are your partners, etc. And start gathering data in advance or evidence, like institutional data, community needs data, prior program outcomes, research citations, etc. So you will already have your grant ready infrastructure, your logic models, etc. So hopefully that helps.
Thanks, Chaz. We are a few minutes over time in the interest of allowing people to get to their next meeting or engagement. I just want to thank our presenters so much for the information today, and we hope to see you at a future QEM webinar. Please visit the QEM events page on the website, qem.org, to find out about future webinars, and we hope to see you at one. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.